Hello there, I'm Manila Chan. You're watching In Question, broadcasting from RT America's National News Headquarters in Washington, D.C. Here are today's top stories. First, in an effort to ramp up vaccinations nationwide, the White House today announced its plan to ship doses directly to underserved communities hit hardest by the pandemic. A full report is straight ahead. Plus, the WHO says not to trust U.S. intel when it comes to the origins of the novel coronavirus. We'll tell you their conclusions next. Then, as Iran celebrates its revolutionary anniversary, tensions still remain high with the U.S., with Tehran now suggesting it could pursue nuclear weapons if Washington continues with sanctions. All right, it's time to boost your news IQ. As the U.S. surpasses 26 million COVID infections, President Biden is scrambling to speed up vaccinations across the country. The administration announcing it will be increasing the vaccine supply again while focusing on providing more inoculations to underserved communities. All this as providers try to keep up with the growing number of second doses needed as millions more Americans become eligible to get the vaccine. RT's Trinity Chavez has the story.
After hitting a few snags, the Biden administration is working to improve its ambitious coronavirus vaccine rollout, this time promising more vaccine supplies come spring and zeroing in on some of the most vulnerable populations in underserved communities. This as new research shows that individuals with dementia, specifically Black Americans, are at increased risk of getting COVID-19.
Photo poke 1, 2, 3.
Today, the race to vaccinate intensifying. The Biden administration ramping up efforts, announcing its increasing vaccine supply to states, tribes, and territories by 5% over last week for a total of a 25% increase since President Biden came into office.
I think we're in a position to think big and move big.
The announcement made as the U.S. is facing new challenges, trying to juggle first and second vaccine doses. While providers are trying to ramp up the number of people getting their first COVID-19 shot, they are also trying to ensure a growing number of others get second doses of the shot, all while millions of Americans are becoming eligible to receive vaccines. In some cases, health departments and providers have had to cancel first dose appointments to ensure there are enough doses for people getting the second shot.
American people are hurt. There's a lot of people are in real trouble.
The Biden administration also announcing the White House will begin sending doses of COVID-19 vaccines to community centers next week.
Go in, pick it up, get it, done.
With more than 1,300 community centers across the country, most of the nearly 30 million people they serve live below the poverty line in minority communities.
So in this initial phase, we will include at least one community health center in each state and territory.
This as a new study reveals that people who have dementia, especially Black Americans, have more of a chance of getting COVID-19. After analyzing electronic health data from 61.9 million American adults, researchers from Case Western University found the risk for contracting the virus is twice as high for people with dementia versus those without it. And while patients were more likely to be hospitalized or die of COVID-19 than people without cognitive disease, among those with dementia, Black patients have nearly 3 times the risk of being infected with coronavirus as white patients did. Pamela Davis, professor of general medical sciences at Case Western University, said that is consistent with other studies in COVID infections that African Americans are more likely to acquire SARS-CoV-2 and also do worse once they get it. It's certainly a vulnerable population and one that's important to protect. And while experts say the vaccine rollout is improving, new data shows about 1 in every 3 Americans are still skeptical of COVID-19 vaccines. And some health officials say that is bad news for any hope of achieving herd immunity and defeating the outbreak here in the U.S. Reporting in New York, Trinity Chavez, RT.
Don't rely on U.S. intel. That's the warning from a member of the COVID expert team at the World Health Organization, which usually steers clear of politically charged statements. Well, this after the WHO team wrapped up its probe into the origins of the novel coronavirus, declaring the virus most likely originated from an animal. RT's Konstantin Rozkov has more details.
The figure who is front and center to the story, Peter Daszak, he is a British-American virologist who was assisting the WHO mission to Wuhan, where they came to find out the origins of the coronavirus. And so the scientist didn't mince his words when he took to Twitter to lash out basically at U.S. intelligence for backing the theories that the virus could have been man-made and came from a Chinese lab. Let's have a listen.
Well, now this. Joe Biden has to look tough on China. Please don't rely too much on U.S. intelligence, increasingly disengaged under Trump and frankly wrong on many aspects.
If we talk about bigger picture, the global scientific community is trying to find out the origins of the current pandemic, right? What is the source of this virus? And so that's why they sent this mission to Wuhan in Hubei, in China's Hubei province, where the virus was first detected in 2019. Now, the probe didn't give all the answers right away, but experts made an important conclusion, important in the light of this ongoing spat between China and the U.S. over who is to blame for the spread of disease. And they made a conclusion that the virus did not originate in a Chinese lab, but most likely was transmitted from animals, presumably bats, to humans. Washington officials, it didn't take long for them to voice their skepticism over this preliminary results. And for example, Ned Price, the U.S. State Department spokesperson, he said that they will not accept the findings of the WHO until they could verify it using their own intelligence.
Broadly speaking, we have expressed our concerns regarding the need for full transparency and access from China and the WHO, access from China and the WHO to all information regarding the earliest days of the pandemic.
And that speaks volumes of the level of trust that the new U.S. administration has towards the World Health Organization. And, you know, this is itself is an interesting turn of events, because as you remember, when Joe Biden came to power, he explicitly claimed that he's going to reverse most of his predecessor's policies, including the one about pulling out of the WHO. Now, as you can see, the new U.S. administration is all but following into the footsteps of the old one in this particular case. And, well, you know, just to remind you, let's have a listen to the way Donald Trump used to speak out on the matter.
Others have criticized you for using the phrase Chinese virus. How do you feel about that? Are you going to continue using that phrase?
Well, China was putting out information which was false, and rather than having an argument, I said I have to call it where it came from. It did come from China.
Well, this latest mission to Wuhan didn't give all the answers. We're still far from understanding the origins of the virus. But I guess what this story has shown is that the probe itself and the issue itself is highly politicized, and scientists are going to be under immense pressure from both American and Chinese politicians. And will that make things more complicated in the pursuit to find out the causes of the pandemic? Well, certainly, yes.
Now to the latest COVID-19 numbers worldwide. Those cases are now topping 107 million, with more than 2.3 million deaths. The U.S. is still leading the way with the most cases, now over 27 million cases, followed by India and then Brazil. Now here stateside, that number of deaths is now reaching 468,000. And over to Canada now, where travelers will be needing to give a negative COVID-19 test taken within 72 hours before seeking entry into the country. Starting February 15th, anyone arriving in Canada by land must show a negative test or get fined up to 3,000 Canadian dollars and be subjected to extensive follow-ups by health officials. Right now, only Canadian citizens, permanent residents, and essential travelers are currently allowed into the country. And a 116-year-old French nun, the world's second oldest person, has survived COVID-19. After testing positive for the virus in mid-January, Sister André recovered just 3 weeks later, saying she didn't even realize she had it. Sister André, who is also blind and uses a wheelchair, said she's now looking forward to celebrating her 117th birthday. And as Iran celebrates its revolutionary anniversary, tensions still remain high with the U.S., with Tehran suggesting it could pursue nuclear weapons if Washington continues with sanctions. We're going to talk about it. And remember, you keep up with all the latest news and catch up with anything you might have missed by downloading the Portable TV app so you can watch us whenever you want. We will be right back. On the 42nd anniversary of the 1979 Islamic Revolution, tensions are once again increasing between the United States and Iran. The U.S. indicating it has no plans to lift sanctions until Iran again complies with the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran is now saying if the U.S. doesn't make the first move, it could turn back on its promise to never create a nuclear weapon. RT's Rachel Blevins is joining us to discuss this debacle here. So, Rachel, why is Iran now suggesting that they're going to change their policy?
So we know that the U.S. and its allies have long accused Iran of planning to create nuclear weapons, and we actually heard about this from Iran's intelligence minister. He addressed these allegations, and he said that according to the country's own laws, they cannot create nuclear weapons. However, he said they haven't ruled it out completely right now, given the fact that the U.S. continues to refuse to lift sanctions on their country. Take a listen to his explanation.
Our nuclear program is a peaceful one, and in the fatwa by the Supreme Leader explicitly stated that the manufacturing of nuclear weapons is forbidden by the Sharia, and the Islamic Republic won't go after them and considers seeking them as haram. However, if a cat is cornered, it may show a kind of behavior that a free cat would not. If Iran is pushed in that direction, then it wouldn't be Iran's fault, but those who pushed it.
Now, even though Israeli officials and members of the Biden administration have claimed that Iran is just weeks away from creating a nuclear weapon, the latest report citing Israeli intelligence actually found that it would likely be up to 2 years before Iran would be able to gather all of the materials needed in order to do so.
Well, given what we just heard, Rachel, how has the U.S. responded to these latest statements?
Well, they actually haven't said much about those statements, which is surprising. Now, President Biden continues to say that he's waiting for Iran to make the first move in order to get back to that nuclear deal. And it's interesting because you look at when he first came into office, he signed dozens of executive orders, many of which were aimed at reversing policies taken by the Trump administration. Yet, even though there were a number of sanctions implemented by Trump, Biden has yet to pull back on those. And even when the White House was asked why the U.S. refuses to lift those sanctions, they continue to say that it was because they were implemented by Trump, and essentially that it's not their problem. Here's what was said at the White House earlier.
Well, that those were actions of the former administration, as you know, and President Biden, of course, was a part of an administration that were advocating for the plan to be put together to begin with. But I think his position, the position of our national security team, and the position that he's been in discussion with our partners about, or I should say conveying to our partners, is that it's really up to Iran to come back into full compliance.
Now, that statement that you heard there is what we continue to hear from the Biden administration, and they have yet to update it as of today.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense when you're taking executive action to overturn the previous administration. Yeah, that's a whole nother argument. But what about the timing of all of this, Rachel? I mean, is that playing a role in this tit for tat back and forth we're seeing?
So today is an incredibly important day for Iran specifically because it marks 42 years since they overthrew the brutal, oppressive dictator who was actually installed by the CIA in a military coup back in 1953. Now, normally on a day like today, on this anniversary, you would see parades throughout the country. Now, because of everything going on right now, we're actually seeing motorcades with thousands of people taking part because Iran has been hit really heavily by the coronavirus pandemic. But it's important because this is a day where a lot of Iranians see it as the day that they stood up against the U.S. and that they rooted out that corruption that was fueled by the Americans who played a significant role in their country. And now when we're talking about anniversaries, it was just last month that it marked 1 year since the U.S. assassinated Qasem Soleimani, Iran's top general. And there were a lot of concerns that maybe they would try to retaliate against U.S. troops in the Middle East. We didn't see that at the time, but it seems like Iran has continued to try to be patient, waiting to see what the new administration was going to do. Well, now it's looking like that patience could be wearing thin as they're seeing exactly what the Biden administration is doing.
Yeah, the new is the same as the old. Same story here. Rachel Blevins, thank you for that update.
Thank you.
And on his final revolution anniversary speech, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani called for an end to the era of sanctions and said, quote, it was God who toppled U.S. President Donald Trump in his bid for re-election. So joining us for more on this anniversary in Tehran, we'll turn to Mohammad Marandi. He's a professor of English literature at the University of Tehran. Professor, thank you for joining us. First, on the remarks made by President Rouhani, this is his final term as president. He made remarks about Donald Trump, but even now with Biden in office, this new administration has stated that they won't return to the nuclear deal without Iran making concessions first. So really, has anything changed from one administration in the U.S. to the other?
Well, although I'm sure the mainstream media, the corporate media, and the U.S. government would say, yes, a lot has changed, but in reality, nothing much has really changed. The United States continues to use maximum pressure against Iran. That means the United States government under Biden is targeting women and children and those who are vulnerable, and therefore these are crimes against humanity. But the Iranians, they have said before that they will not appease Trump, and I think that Biden, who is in a much more difficult situation than Trump was, he is in no position for to impose anything upon the Iranians. And so the Iranians who didn't appease Trump will not appease Biden. So while so far nothing has changed in Washington, I think the situation in the region, in Iran, and in the United States has changed significantly. And the United States doesn't have the sort of strength and capabilities that it had before to, as they call it, contain Iran.
Now, on that note, Professor, the JCPOA is not a bilateral agreement, although the press makes it seem that way. Russia, France, China, Germany, the UK, they still remain active parties in this deal. Who do you see as the key players in this situation in bringing both the U.S. and Iran back to the table? Who's the power broker here?
Well, the Iranians don't believe that they have ever left the table. The United States, after Obama negotiated the deal, his administration, he never implemented the deal. It was the Iranians who immediately implemented the deal, and the Americans only implemented bits and pieces, and they dragged their feet until the very last day of Obama's administration. Under Trump, we know that the Americans tore the deal and bullied other countries into sanctioning Iran. And even after that, the Iranians continued to abide by the deal in full, even though the Europeans abided by Trump's demands and sanctioned Iran. And only after a year did the Iranians gradually decrease their commitments. And even as we speak now, Iran continues to abide by some of its commitments, but that will end soon. So it's not the Iranians that left the deal, and it's not the Iranians that discontinued to implement their obligations. It was the Americans. So it was the Americans who left the table. It was the Americans who hurt ordinary Iranians who were abiding by the deal. And therefore, it is the Americans who must restore confidence. It's not the Iranians. The Americans have to show that they are committed to the deal. They have to abide by the deal. And it has to be verified by the Iranians, not like last time round under Obama, where they promised something and they did something else.
Yeah.
And so the Iranians are not going to accept American exceptionalism. They have to abide by their commitments.
Well, while those statements are correct, in terms of the other remaining members of the party, Professor, who do you think is going to have Joe Biden's ear? I mean, I doubt it's going to be Russia. Is it going to be France? Is it going to be China? Is it Germany, the UK? Who is going to talk to Joe Biden to say, let's come back and put this together?
I don't think anyone really has the capability to convince the United States to do anything. The United States, as you rightly point out, has major problems with Russia as well as with China. And the Europeans simply don't have any clout. They are too weak, and they are increasingly weak as time goes by. It's really a decision that the Americans have to make. Biden could have, with his presidential decrees, reverse everything that Trump did very quickly, and also by giving orders to the Treasury Department and the State Department to change their position. So if Biden wants to bring about change, he can do it very easily. But I think he's looking for an excuse not to do anything. And that is why he expects Iran, which has suffered because of U.S. violations and then the U.S. tearing of the deal, they expect the victim to first create confidence or build,
extend the olive branch
measures, whereas it's the United States that has to do that.
Right. And Professor, since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, this is 42 years now, what has changed on the ground? What's remained the same? How about the relationship with the U.S.? Seems very similar.
Well, I think what has changed after the revolution is that Iran has become an extremely independent country, a fiercely independent country. A country that Iran before the revolution was subservient to the United States, and after the revolution, Iran became highly independent. And that is something that the Americans simply cannot forgive. They haven't forgiven Iran for the revolution itself. I think the very problem is the revolution. And as long as Iran was like Saudi Arabia or like Turkey or like Egypt, things were fine. But now that Iran, decides its foreign policy as well as its internal policies in Tehran, rather than the decisions being made in Washington, that is unacceptable. And we've seen those changes, with regards to apartheid in Palestine, apartheid in South Africa. Iran under the Shah even supported the United States in Vietnam. And so, everything has changed in that regard. And the United States, until it comes to terms with the reality that Iran is going to remain independent and it's going to pursue an independent foreign policy and that it abides by its own indigenous values, these tensions are going to continue. But the only difference now is that we're seeing a decline in U.S. power. And as time goes on, the U.S. capability to so-called contain Iran is simply going to decrease.
Very good points, as always. Good to have you on. Professor Mohammad Morandi in Tehran, thank you. After months of military tensions between China and India, China's defense ministry announced there will be an organized disengagement of Chinese and Indian armed forces. The tensions first reignited back in May of 2020 when Chinese and Indian troops clashed on the beach of Pangong Lake, in an area that's shared between China's Tibet and India's Ladakh region. The agreement reached on Wednesday declares that frontline armed units from China and India have already begun to disengage from any activity that could further escalate the situation in that area. And Twitter is stepping up its crackdown on conservative commentators accused of spreading false information about the U.S. electoral process. Now, two of the latest examples are Jim Hoft, founder of the website Gateway Pundit, and radio host Wayne Allen Root. Now, they have both been blocked by Twitter for what it called, quote, repeated violations of civic integrity policy. They fell foul with the platform's rules by promoting Donald Trump's claim that the November election was marred by fraud. Now, since the storming of the U.S. Capitol last month, Twitter has banned some 70,000 accounts for similar reasons, including that of the former president, Donald Trump. Now, we spoke with Wayne Allen Root about his ban, and he says alternative voices are being silenced.
This is a Joe McCarthy witch hunt against conservative voices. They're trying to eliminate dissent. They're trying to eliminate diversity while they talk all day about diversity. If you're black, it's great. If you're Latino, it's great. If you're gay, it's great. If you're a woman, it's great. If you're transsexual, it's great. God forbid, in the United States of America, you be a capitalist conservative. They want to destroy your life and silence you, censor you, ban you, burn your books. This is the irony. You know, the hero of liberals, all the liberal activists, is Saul Alinsky. He wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. And he always said, look in the mirror, whatever you see, blame the other guy. Democrats have spent 50 years attacking Joe McCarthy for witch hunts. Now they're very good at it. I don't even know why I was suspended. If he showed me the tweet, I'd be willing to bet you that 74 million Americans that voted for Trump agree with every word of my tweet. How do you ban someone's opinions when 74 million people, half the voters, agree with them?
I'm sure he had a lot more to say, but we had to leave it right there. That is going to do it for us right now, but make sure you keep up with everything in question at all times by downloading the super cool app, Portable TV, so you can watch us whenever you want. Now follow me. Let me see if I can get all this straight. Telegram, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all of that stuff at Manila Chan. Thank you for watching. I'll see you back here soon.